ever made one decision that changed your life forever? Or maybe even saved your life? Today's special guest is Mike Jaffe. Mike's a coach, speaker, and he's the author of the new book, Wake Up, Your Life is Calling. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
So you are a 9/11 survivor, and you've got an amazing story that you're now using in a very powerful way. Can you share your story with us?
Yeah, sure. My story starts back a number of years ago, and everything was fine. That was part of the problem. Things were fine, and I was kind of complacent about that. But sometimes you start to recognize things. You get some awareness, and you realize what the cost of that is. And for me, that cost showed up with my little girl. I had a good corporate job, but my commute was about 2 hours each way. So I was commuting 4 hours a day, back and forth to, again, a fine job. It wasn't tied to any passion, but it was okay. Good people, good company. But what was happening is I'd leave in the morning and my daughter would be sleeping, and I'd come home in the evening and my daughter would be sleeping, and this would happen every day. Days became weeks, became months, and the cost was just getting really high. I was never seeing her awake during the week at all. And even on the weekends, I was so resentful, blaming everybody else for my situation, that negative energy was just spilling into my time, even when I did have time with them. So one day, I just decided that, I need to be the one to do something about this. And I went outside, got away from all the noise, and I sat outside and I just started thinking, where can I start? How can I do something? I wasn't going to leave my job. It wasn't about being reckless or irresponsible. It wasn't my company's fault of any of this. So I didn't know what to do. And as I was thinking, I thought, well, where do I have control? Where can I take a small bite? And I thought about perhaps if I had breakfast with them the next morning, right? So I thought, all right, so rather than taking the early train, I'll just take the next train. 20-minute difference, not a big deal. But I'll get to see my daughter awake. We'll have breakfast together, and it's a nice little start. And, I came up with this intention. I immediately called my wife. I was excited. She was like, okay, breakfast, that's nice, And I went back to work in that afternoon. And Steve, what was really interesting is that afternoon when I went back to work, everything was better. My job was better. My environment was better. And I realized that I had been the source of my unhappiness, of all of my suffering. It just was all right here. And I went home. I got up the next morning, and as we do when we have these rituals, I was all dressed, ready to go at my normal time. And my wife came out. She said, we were going to have breakfast, but if you want, I could still take you to make your normal train. And that's when I was standing at my crossroads, and I really didn't know what to do. So I thought about it for a moment, and that's when the tug-of-war started. You ever had one of those tug-of-wars? One side is saying, go to work, don't be late. Your little girl won't even notice. It was a good idea, good for you, but just go to work. Don't get in trouble. Don't be late. Go. And then the other side is saying, well, no, the whole point was that you wanted to have a little time, and this is about taking a little bit of control back. And if you don't do it now, when are you going to ever do this? And so I had this back and forth going on, and I didn't really know what to do. So finally, I looked at my family, and I just said, you know what? The whole point was to have breakfast, so let's have breakfast. And because we had that breakfast, I was still in the subway when the first plane slammed into my floor on the 96th floor of the World Trade Center, because that morning just happened to be the morning of 9/11.
Unbelievable. So, I get chills, Mike. I know your story, and I still get chills. It's just an incredible story. So, now you've taken this incredible story and you've begun to use it in a very powerful way. But what was sort of the moment, or why was it you decided you wanted to write a book?
No, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and that was part of the problem. I had no vision. I had no idea what I wanted to live into. I didn't have career direction. I was just doing what I call floating down the river. So this showed up, and okay, I can do that, and I did it there for a little while, and then I went back to school. I got an MBA, and because that's what you do, and another opportunity showed up, but I never really took the reins and was driving towards anything. So I just kept floating. And after 9/11 happened, after this whole experience happened, while I didn't have a vision yet, the one thing I was clear about was that I owned it, that I needed to be the one to generate this. I needed to be more of an adventurer in my own life. I had to be the one to go and discover new possibilities for myself. I couldn't wait any longer for them just to show up. And so I had set this new intention, and the first thing I did with that was I re-engaged the work I was doing because, I still needed that platform. It was only my fault if I was suffering. So I tried to maximize the experience I was having there. I mean, there was plenty of learning. There was, unfortunately, a lot of opportunity there because we had lost so many people. And so I was able to get myself positioned into some really great projects, even knowing that this wasn't going to be the end all. But why not utilize this time and maximize and give as much value as I could and get as much value as I could back, because I learned very clearly every day is a precious gift. And it wasn't until about a year and a half later that one of my wife's friends casually, just in the kitchen, said to me, Mike, you'd be a great coach. And I said, yeah, when my daughter's older, I'll coach soccer or softball or baseball or whatever. She said, no, a business coach. I said, what is that? I never even heard of that. And this was probably back in 2003. And, in the past, I would have had some gratitude. I was, hey, thanks for that idea. Nice thought. I appreciate you thinking of me like that. And I would have just let that idea float on down the river.
Right.
But because of this experience, because of this intention I had, I realized, all right, here's a gift. Here's a sign. Here's something. What am I going to do about it? And I immediately went upstairs and I researched. And what I discovered was a whole new world unfolded right in front of me. Now, that world already existed, but it didn't exist for me. And so when I went up and I actually did something, I took an action, I really discovered a whole new world of possibility. And for the first time, as I'm reading and learning and exploring this world, I finally felt like, all right, now I know where I'm supposed to be. I'd never felt that before. Now,
Wow.
Obviously, the question was, how am I going to get there? And, there's no blue pill to get there. It's a process. And so little by little, I started to learn what this new world was. I experienced this world of coaching. And as I did that, I was just discovering more and more insights about the lessons I was learning, the life I was living, the challenges I was facing from a whole different perspective. And over time, as I made that shift into the coaching world from a stable corporate environment to a very uncertain entrepreneurial environment, at some point I said, how am I going to play bigger? How am I going to share this wisdom that I've gotten through this experience with others? And I realized one of the ways I want to do this is eventually write a book. But it took a couple of years for me to finally organize myself and get the help I needed. I had a great editor who helped me take everything that was in here and actually put it into some structure and deliver the book that I have. So it took a while. It was definitely a process.
Well, thanks for gifting it to the world, Mike. We've said this on the show before. There are those people who just believe that they're at the effect of the world, and then there are those like you who know that they can affect their world. And by choosing the latter, obviously you take the reins. So one of the things that you say is, why settle for fine when so much more is possible? Why settle for fine? And so many of us settle for fine. Tell us more.
Well, I think what happens is that it's really easy. Well, let me give you an example. Up here, let's use a spectrum. Up here is inspiration. And when you're inspired, when you're at a 9 or a 10, let's say, and you have this inspiration and this passion, it's easy to take action because that passion fuels you. It's a catalyst. It gives you confidence. It gives you focus. It gives you energy to do something with that passion, with that confidence, with that energy you have, with that inspiration. Down on the bottom is desperation. And when you're living at a 1 or a 2 and you're desperate, you're going to do something because you're feeling enough consequence. You're feeling enough pain or challenge that it causes you to make a change. It's that middle, that stagnation, that 4, 5, 6, that's so tricky because things are fine. They're not really what you want, but they're not bad enough to stimulate, to be a catalyst, to cause action. And so what happens is we get trapped there, we get stuck there, we get attached. We start to protect that middle world because we don't want to lose that little bit that we have. So we become afraid to get outside of the box, to get out of our comfort zone, to challenge ourselves, to try new things, especially in an environment that we've been through in the last couple of years, which has been one of a lot of financial, environmental, a lot of fear, a lot of challenge where everybody's kind of hunkering down into protection mode. And when we go through storms, listen, 9/11, things like that are big storms. We all go through that. In fact, I lost my mom only a few months ago. Huge storm. Obviously terrible, and I'm still feeling it, and I'm still going through it. And one of the things about life is that we're all going to face storms of whatever magnitude in our lives. But the thing about storms is that they all come with some kind of gift. Not a gift of the loss that we experience, obviously not, but we change as a result of these storms. Some part of us gets called into being that might not have been there. Even with my mom, as I'm going through that, I'm trying to think, what is the gift of this? I'm going through this terrible grieving. What's the gift here? And the gift for me was two things. One is when I shared with the people that I interact with on social media to say, hey, say a prayer for my mom. The response I got was overwhelming, and I shared it with her, and she was so touched. That was a gift for her, to know that she mattered, that she really meant something. And the second gift was it gave me an opportunity to give something to my family, to be a leader there, and give love and commitment and be courageous and all of those things. When we come out of these storms, fine looks pretty good. Like, the first step is to get back to fine, to go down from the storm to fine. But the problem is, again, we get trapped there. And when you go through these experiences, you realize that every day is a gift and fine is not enough. We need to strive for more than fine. We can't let our fears, our discomfort, our reasonability keep us stuck playing at just this middle ground level. It's not enough, because the last thing I want for people is to look back 5 years from now and say, why didn't I start 5 years ago? I talk to a lot of older people, and even my grandmother, she's 97, she's still alive. And I love speaking to her and her friends and people that have this great life experience. And I say, what is it? If you were looking back, what do you want to share? What kind of wisdom can you give to us?
Right.
And not one of them ever says I would strive lower. Not one of them. They all say, I would have loved more, I would have risked more, I should have played bigger. What the heck was I so afraid of? And so part of my mission as a human wake-up call, as that catalyst to spark people into action, is to make sure that you don't settle for fine. If you're settling for fine, you need a wake-up call, because there's too much that you're leaving on the table. There's too much out there. And you don't have to know how, but you have to know that it's possible. It may not feel possible from where you're sitting, but there's so many undiscovered worlds out there just waiting for you to tap into them, to play bigger. It doesn't have to be changed in your job. It could be within your business organization. But it's time to stop letting our fears keep us stuck in this world of fine.
Mike, we've got to go to break, but when we come back, the book is called Wake Up, Your Life is Calling, and I have to wonder how many people are stuck in fine and don't realize it. You're watching We Mean Business. We'll be back in seconds.
This can't be happening.
This can't be happening.
Of course it's not happening. Armored car.
Listen, having money isn't about luck. Make your own coffee, save $1,000 a year. Feed me.
Feed the pig.
Welcome back to We Mean Business. I'm Steve Dorfman, and today we're with Mike Jaffe, author of the book Wake Up, Your Life is Calling. Now, Mike, we talked about this state of being fine, and
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of people live in this state of, quote, fine. And your book is called Wake Up, so I'm just thinking how many people are in that state of fine and just don't realize that they're stuck there.
Absolutely. It's easy to make excuses as to why things can't be done or why they're not possible. I call that our excuse machine. Whether it's I don't have time, or it's not possible, or I don't know how to do that. These are all excuses. One thing about time is you're never going to find time. You have to create time.
Yeah. Well, so you also talk about the art of disruption. How does that tie into all of this?
Well, again, disruption means breaking apart those patterns that we're so comfortable with. If it ain't broke, break it. Not everything, but when we find that we're doing things the same way, but we're not experiencing the satisfaction we want when things are fine, but we want more than that, we have to learn how to disrupt those comfortable behaviors, those patterns that we're doing. We have to break them up. And there's fear there because it's a big fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown is one of the most powerful fears. Yeah. So what I tell people is when you disrupt, you don't have to, just like you don't have to walk away from something cold turkey, but you need to add something. You need to take a step in another direction just to get some momentum built so that you can learn through your experience and not be stuck by your concept of what's possible. And
oftentimes when we talk about fear, we think of fear of failure. So what's some advice that you have for folks on the way that a lot of us seem to experience failure, like the way we sort of see failure or experience failure? What's some advice on that?
Yeah, well, fear, a very common acronym is false evidence appearing real. Right. Our fears feel like the truth, but they're not the truth. They're just a perception. They're an emotional feeling. And, fear or failure, when we feel these things, we get these blocks, we have to acknowledge them because they're real feelings. At the same time, we also have to understand that that's our bodies, that's our minds trying to protect us from something. So it's just doing its job of preservation. And it's very powerful. But for me, when we're talking about our work, there's obviously very quantitative metrics that we're judged by, right? Did you meet your sales goal? Did you, reduce your cost by X%? There are quantitative ways we get measured at work. And at the end of the day, no matter how much effort you put in, you either met your goals or you didn't. When we're talking about personal and professional development, when we're talking about life design, we need to start using success and failure on a very different term. And in this case, it's not about the outcome. It's about the process. It's about the effort. It's about getting up and falling down and getting up again and falling down because it's that process of exploration, getting out of your comfort zone. Even if you fall down, that's where all your wisdom's going to come from. That's where all the growth comes from.
That's right. That's right. So you also talk about creating a roadmap. And so where does one get started? What are the first couple steps for creating that roadmap? And what is the roadmap? Is that what we see on the whiteboard behind you? What's going on there?
Yeah, that is a roadmap. I mean, that is what we call a mind map. For restructuring my talk a little bit, I want to inject a couple of new stories and things like that. And so, as evidenced on the whiteboard, a roadmap is really how we're going to get from where we are to where we want to be. And the way that we're going to do that is by chunking things down. There's been a lot of research, a lot of neuroscience about how do people learn, how do people make changes. And more, the evidence is showing that we only have so much active mental capacity at one time. So we need to take things on in small bites. And so when we're talking about a roadmap, we need to take this intention that we have and break it down into manageable sizes so that we can get started. I tell my clients that if the first step you're going to take is overwhelming, you're taking too big a bite. Take a small bite because all of these small steps absolutely add up to big change over time.
Mike, we hear so much about goal setting and the importance of goal setting. Do you talk with folks about this? Is this part of your coaching? How do you see it? What do you recommend there?
Yeah, goals to me, are it really is one of the pillars of what coaching is. It's about driving towards goals, moving forwards towards goals. For me, change, the topic of change, dealing with change is not easy. It's hard. It's very challenging. Even good change. Let's say you get promoted in your job. Well, now you're leaving a position that that you feel confident about, and you're getting into a whole new world of responsibilities that you may be unproven in, so there's discomfort there. And that's a good change. You may be moving your desk or your office and you're leaving that little community that you had there into a whole new world. Again, fear of the unknown. So all change is going to have some sense of loss attached to it. And with change comes these two forces. One is a push. I equate change to crossing this rickety bridge. Not one of these nicely paved bridges, but one of those the wooden planks with the rope handles, swinging in the wind. And you're here and you want to get over to there and there's a huge, deep, dark ravine in between you. What's going to get you across? You have to know why you want to get over to the other side, and that's what a goal is. But it needs to be more than just a goal. It needs to be a compelling goal. It needs to be something that's meaningful for you, that's going to give you the strength to keep taking those small steps, even when your life shows up, even when the challenge shows up, which it will, so that you can start taking those individual steps and persist across that bridge. That's what I call the pull. So a goal is very much a pull. whereas the push force is what you're trying to move away from. And it's the combination of this push and this pull that help you actually take on that change and make it sustainable for you.
Well, Mike, we talked earlier about failure, and I'm curious as to what your view is on this. Do you feel that people are as fearful of success, or maybe even more fearful of success than failure? What's your experience there?
You know, I've experienced that. You know, I think, well, once I start speaking exponentially more, you know, because I do a lot of speaking now, but what happens if it explodes? Am I going to have time with my family? Am I going to be able to see my kids? I have a son now as well. You know, so the fears of success are there more responsibilities? Are there more expectations? Am I going to let people down? You know, fear of success is just as valid as fear of failure. It comes down to looking bad, not delivering, disappointment of others. It comes down to some of these very primal needs we have for acceptance and approval. So fear of success is very valid. The question is, you have to remember, you know, you can stay in control. You can say no. You can set up non-negotiables, boundaries for yourself, and then you have to honor them. See, I find people struggle with success when they set up these boundaries, but they don't honor them. They're on their phones at all hours of the night instead of training people to say, this is my window for being unplugged, and I am not available during that time. So we need to honor our own boundaries, and that will help us manage this fear of success.
Yeah, that's great. You know, when I think about managing our own boundaries, you know, how great is it, or how amazing is it that when you can have an accountability partner, because that morning that you were ready to get on the train and your accountability partner, in this case your wife, you know, was holding you to your own standard. You know, of course, it changed the course of everything for you and your family. And now, Mike, what about this whole thing about time management? You know, I've heard so much about time management, and there are people teaching time management, but then there's some new information on energy management. So what's been your experience between time management versus energy management?
Well, you know, time management is a little bit more concrete in that we're looking at, you know, the hours that we have in the day, and we're trying to fit as much as we can in those hours. And one of the concepts that I like when we're thinking of time management is understanding how your time, how you are during different times of day. So utilize your most thoughtful work during the time that you have the most capacity for that kind of work, and then do more of the administrative or the more relaxed kind of work later in the day or whenever you need to take a mental break. Energy management is different. You know, energy management, what I understand about it, what I've learned about it, is that we're the only mammal that sprints and sprints and sprints and sprints and sprints. You know, every other mammal sprints and stops and sprints and stops. And so energy management is really about making smaller chunks of time, high intensity, but then replenishing that energy, taking a break. And it's so counter to what we've created within our work environments to just say, you know, that's inefficient. You got to fill up every second with as much work as possible. The problem is later in the day, you have such diminishing returns on that time that you're less productive, not more productive. So if we were able to incorporate smaller chunks of time with a kind of a replenishing break in between, it doesn't have to be long, but just something to unplug, refresh, and then plug back in, what we find is that throughout the day, we're actually more productive. And one of the hints I can give your listeners or your viewers is that I have a little tool, a little app called Insight Timer. Now, I'm not a spokesman for them. I just like the tool.
And what is this application called, Mike?
It's called Insight Timer. I should get a commission on these. I have all my clients do it because it's really effective. It could be any timer that can go off every frequency. For me, it's 15 minutes. It could be 20 minutes. It could be every hour. But I like the 15-minute intervals because it's frequent enough to kind of bring me back after I start to, you know, go off on a tangent somewhere or speed into something. It just allows me to stay focused and keeps my energy flowing.
Yeah. I have a friend that uses one, and I think it's called a mindfulness timer. So I think there's probably a couple.
Exactly. Same kind of thing. Same kind of concept.
Yeah. So, Mike, what about these folks that, you know, we can all see that they need this little bit of a push or that they need a little bit of a fire put under them, but so many of us are afraid to give them that nudge. I mean, should we give them the nudge? How do we give them the nudge? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, it's hard to give someone something they don't want. What'll happen is their defenses will go up, and they're not even going to hear what you're saying. Everything starts with a shift in perspective, and the best shift in perspective is for someone to see it for themselves. And so what you might want to do is talk about your own insights and your own reflections and hope and put it out there so that somebody can grab it and take it for themselves. But throwing it onto somebody is not going to necessarily land well. I'm doing this new workshop with my colleague named Noah Blumenthal, who's a brilliant guy, and it's all about influence. And that's essentially what we're talking about is influence. And there are certain triggers. David Roth does a lot of work on this, about how we have certain triggers that influence whether our actual mind, our brain, is open to receiving messages or not. And understanding these triggers can make a big difference in how somebody receives your communication. So there are definitely ways, and we do this in our workshop, in how you can communicate with someone to make them more open to these kinds of communications where you're trying to develop them, where you're trying to give them feedback, where you're trying to have them see something. There's definitely a science to it. But just going ahead and making them wrong or telling them that something's broken or not working, it may or may not get through, but usually there's a cost to that.
That's great advice, Mike. You talk about something you call owning the quest to get there. Can you tell us more about that?
Say that again, owning what?
Owning the quest to get there.
Yeah, well, again, for me, a lot of this is about, initially it was about why everyone else should be doing what they were doing. And I'll give you a quick story. When I was living in the Upper West Side in New York City, I lived there for many years, and I loved the neighborhood. And one day I came out, and I'm looking, and everybody has a scowl on their face, and I'm like, what's wrong with these people? And every block, people were looking more and more angry to me, and it was getting me more and more angry. I was just like, what kind of neighborhood do I live in? What kind of place is this? Maybe everybody who says New York is rough is right. And then by the time I got to the subway stop a few blocks away, I looked at my reflection in a building, and I realized I was the craziest looking guy in the neighborhood. No wonder nobody smiled. A shift in perspective and awareness.
Yeah.
And so I did an experiment. The next day, I said I was going to smile at every single person I saw, no matter what the reaction was. But I had to own it. And so as I'm walking those couple of blocks, hey, good morning. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, how's it going? People looked at me strange. One person even crossed the street to get away from me. But no matter what their initial reaction was, their faces, at least half of them, their faces melted into a smile. And what I realized is that, there are three things you can do for any situation. You can either change it outright, you can influence it, or you can accept it. That's it. If you're tolerating it, you're not accepting it. You're just going to suffer. You're giving up your power. But if you're willing, if you have the ability to change it and it's important to you, then make the change. If you want others to change, quite often I find that the best way to influence them is by changing yourself. And that's what I did.
It's great, Mike. I've studied something called demand qualities, and it's the qualities that we all possess that demand we're treated a certain way. So that scowl on our face, is obviously demanding we're treated a certain way, but we don't know it until we see our own reflection. It's really, really great stuff.
Well, that's it. That's why it all starts with awareness, with a shift in perspective. Otherwise, we're almost blind to ourselves. We just keep doing what we do, and that's why fine is such a trap.
That's right. Well, Mike, listen, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for sharing so much with our viewers. You really provided a lot of value here. To learn more about Mike Jaffe and his book, Wake Up, Your Life is Calling, you can visit wemeanbiz.tv. I'm Steve Dorfman. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.